a lot of the reasons for lost productivity can be traced back to you and your team. This is good news. It's good news and bad news. The bad news is it could be your fault, right? But the good news is that means you can change it. So you can put systems in place. You can do things to positively impact their productivity. So that's number 2, is that you can increase their productivity. Another way to say that is you may be the problem. Where do we start? Well, here's what I can tell you, is that the underlying problem is often the JETS trap. The underlying problem behind a lot of these productivity losses and profit bleeds is the JETS trap. This is the just enough to start trap. Let me explain what that is. This is when we do just enough to get an estimate out the door, just enough to start, just enough to get the estimate out the door. We do just enough to get a contract signed. There are allowances in there, missing selections, missing specifications, these gaps that are just waiting for us to step into. We do just enough to get a purchase order issued, just enough to get a subcontractor started, just enough to get a project started. Let's just get out there and get started, and then we'll figure it out later. Does that sound familiar on your projects? Think about that. How many problems are you dealing with because of this just enough to start? It happens at all levels, all right? Small projects, big projects. One of the biggest projects where I saw this show up was on a $30 million office building. I was working for the real estate developer who was going to develop, build, and own this $30 million office building for a very large Fortune 50 company. And it was interesting to see how this played out. The way the whole project started with the just enough to start. The real estate broker sent out an RFP, a request for proposal, saying we need a basic office building. I think it was 140,000 square foot office building. And they did just enough. This was like a 2 or 3 page RFP for a $30 million project. Okay, so they did just enough to get the developer selected. And then they had this schedule that had to be met, had to move in by a certain date because their existing lease was going to expire. So the clock was ticking, probably started 6 months too late to begin with. And then we were brought on as the developer. We were selected based on that just enough to start RFP. And then it was time to get the project bid out. So it was, all right, we need to get a general contractor on board. Well, we need to have a design. We have some bidding documents that they can bid on. So we went back to them. All right, what do you need? And they're like, they hadn't done the program yet. They didn't know what size cubicle they would have, how much amenity space, how much meeting space. They didn't have a program yet. So they had us, the entire team started the design with just enough to start. It was based on this 140,000 square foot assumption. Well, we started the bidding process, and about 2 weeks before the bids were due, they came back and said, oh, crap. You know that 140,000 square foot building we said we needed? After doing the program, we realized we need 162,000 square feet. So we're 2 weeks out from having bids due, and we're redesigning this building from 140,000 square feet to 160,000 square feet. Okay? Imagine the chaos. Changing the design after bid documents have already gone out. And then, so that was a big problem. So we did just enough to start the bidding process, just enough to start the design process. The whole project was structured as a fast-tracked project because we needed to get the core and shell out there and get that under contract. And then there was going to be an interior fit-out contract. So we're doing just enough. So we're getting locked into a general contractor, not even knowing what the finishes were going to be, doing just enough to get. So just enough to get a contractor on board. So the entire project was plagued with just enough to start problems, just enough to get a developer on board, just enough to get the design started, just enough to get a general contractor on board. And it was chaos for about 18 months from start to finish. absolute chaos. So that's what the just enough to start trap looks like on a residential project, custom home. The way the just enough to start shows up is, all right, we need to get a contract signed. We got to get this project started so we can fill a gap in our schedule. Yeah, but Todd, we don't have the selections on this. We don't have all the details figured out. We don't know what the finishes are. And you're like, well, you know what? We got to get this thing going because we have a gap in our schedule, or we've already committed to the customer, or for whatever reason. So we've got to get it started. Let's do just enough to start. We'll figure everything else out later. And then what happens? We haven't selected the flooring. We haven't selected the cabinets, the countertops. And then we start construction, and then we start making these selections after construction started. And that sets off this domino effect. Well, this countertop they selected, when they were selecting the countertop, it changed the cabinet design, which changes the electrical layout and changes the lighting, which is already roughed in. And oh crap, we've already drywalled it, so now we have to go change this. And it sets off this ripple effect of changes. So I'm here to tell you a lot of the chaos on your projects, a full 80% of the chaos on your projects can be traced back to the just enough to start trap.